Welcome to Origins, a new podcast series from the Dermatology Digest that takes a look back at the development of key techniques and technologies. In this episode, pioneer and innovator Dr. Mitchell Goldman, the founder and medical director of Cosmetic Laser Dermatology and medical director of Platinum Dermatology Partners in San Diego, California, discusses the popularization of sclerotherapy and how it led to the development of multiple new technologies.
The treatment of varicose and telangiectatic leg veins is really popular these days. And what I'd like to share with you is how this all came about. Part of the reason for me sharing this is to try to encourage and inspire our younger doctors into doing things that they don't think is possible. So once upon a time, when I was doing my residency at UCLA in 1984, one of my incredible professors, Dr. David Duffy, came into the office and he had this bottle of something called ethoxysclerol, known as polydocanol. And he said, "Is there any nurse that has any leg veins?" And one of the nurses volunteered and he started injecting her leg veins with this medicine. And as one of the residents, I was sitting and observing him doing it, and I was wondering how this really works. And I asked Dr. Duffy, I said, "How does it really work?" And he goes, "Well, you just inject the medicine into the vein, it makes the veins disappear, and the patients are really happy." And I said, "Well, how do you know where to inject?" And he goes, "Well, just inject it wherever you want to." And then I said, "Well, how do you know what kind of concentrations to inject?" And he said, "It really doesn't matter. It works every time." And Dr. Duffy was an incredibly enthusiastic private attending physician that would always inspire residents with his new types of treatments in our clinic. So after that visit, I went to the library, and in those days we didn't have computers, and I started looking up all of the publications I could find on the treatment of varicose and telangiectatic leg veins. To my surprise, there were very few in the English language. Most were in French, Italian, Russian, German, Portuguese. And so I enlisted one of my co-residents, Patty Cavender, to help me translate some of the French. And I actually used the UCLA translation service to help me translate some of the other publications. And I learned that there was not much that people really knew, and there were not that many experiments that were being done. And so what I did is I wanted to do a research study on just how does this solution work and what is the best solution and what are the best concentrations in using the solution. So I discussed my ideas with one of my professors, Dr. Richard Bennett, and he said, "Yes, Mitch, go for it." And so what I did is I basically started a research project injecting different types of solutions and different types of concentrations of those solutions. And I actually used an animal model. And I do want to apologize to those that don't feel that medicine should be advanced on using animals. But the reality is almost all of medicine does use animals for research. And I did so as well. And I can assure you that the animals were well taken care of and no pain. And I love animals to this day. So as that is a disclaimer, I actually started doing my research and I basically was injecting all of these compounds into the rabbit ear. It turned out they have a very, very nice vein. And I figured out exactly which solutions did what and like what were the right concentrations and which solutions worked better with each other. And I actually published this report in the Archives of Dermatology. Now, back in the day, it was not an easy thing to get things published because, again, remember, we didn't have computers. And so the editor of the archives was an incredible guy named Dr. Ken Arndt. And Dr. Arndt took the time to actually, in red, redo my whole research paper, which was eventually published, I guess, in 1987. Now, the backstory is in doing all of this research, I ran up quite the bill for the Department of Dermatology at UCLA, so much so that I was brought before a tribunal of the department, and they literally wanted to kick me out of the residency for doing it. It was that expensive of a study. But along with Dr. Bennett and other doctors, or Richard Strick and Richard Kaplan, they came to my rescue, and I actually was not thrown out of the residency program. But what this led to is an interest in sclerotherapy amongst dermatologists. I was invited to give grand rounds at the Cleveland Clinic as a resident, as well as UCLA. I presented all of my findings at the ASDS in 1986, and was approached by a guy named Sam Stegman, who we all know is one of the founders of dermatologic surgery, who encouraged me to continue my research. I was also asked by the American Academy of Dermatology at that time to put on a whole seminar on sclerotherapy at our annual meeting, and things just kept progressing. At around the same time, the pulse dye laser was coming into fruition. And I had joined, when I graduated my residency, Dr. Richard Fitzpatrick in San Diego, who had a very keen interest in treating vascular diseases with lasers. And so, based on my research on sclerotherapy treatment, the Candela Corporation asked me to do research with their pulse dye laser on the treatment of telangiectasias. And we used similar models, both in the little rabbit ears as well as in people. And we basically were able to prove that the pulse dye laser was very effective in treating telangiectasias, except it needed a little bit of tweaking. And so we encouraged Candela to increase the wavelength from 585 to 595, and also to increase the pulse duration of their laser from about a half a millisecond to in the 3 to 6 millisecond. And then some of my colleagues, like Ariel Kavar, performed those additional studies proving that you could get lasers to also work for leg veins. At around the same time, I was presenting my research on both sclerotherapy as well as pulse dye laser at a variety of different meetings. And I was met by a Dr. Shimon Eckhouse, who was working on developing flash lamp technology for removing paint from F-16 fighter planes, which are made of carbon fiber and acrylic. And every time the plane is going into the forest, it has to have one type of paint, and if it goes over the ocean, it has to have another kind of paint. And so the way they got the paint off is by literally flashing it off. And Dr. Eckhouse said, I can actually build a machine, a flash lamp, in order to treat these veins that you're talking about with a pulse dye laser. And he did a mathematical model proving that you don't need a single wavelength of light. You could use a broad spectrum of light. And this is now called the intense pulse light. So I basically helped him raise some capital. We formed a company called Energy Systems Corporation, which is now known as Luminous. And back in 1992, we started doing the intense pulse light research. When we treated veins with the intense pulse light, it actually worked and they made them go away. But much to our surprise, the hair also tended to go away, the skin got smoother, and the surrounding solar lentigos and other cutaneous abnormalities also started to resolve. And so what this ended up being is photorejuvenation. And many of you will recognize the term photofacial, which was coined by one of my med student friends, Pat Bitter, when I taught him how to use the intense pulse light. And that basically made the intense pulse light the most widely used device in the world for any cosmetic procedures. So we go from treating leg veins and learning how to do it with sclerotherapy to then getting involved with lasers. But the final aspect of this association of leg veins was the development of what's called endoluminal laser closure, or EVLT. And that is a procedure where we actually destroy the great saphenous vein and larger veins. Now, almost no dermatologists in the United States were doing this procedure. But I was taught by a Dr. John Bergen, one of the famous vascular surgeons in San Diego, on how to do a procedure called ligation and strippings. I was also went to Europe and was taught by Dr. Pierre Auvry in France how to do this procedure as well. And so I came back to the United States and I was the first assistant to Dr. Bergen doing ligation and strippings as a dermatologist. We had a patient once that came in and he had eaten, and so they were going to cancel the procedure. And I said, since tumescent anesthesia is used on wide awake patients, for the treatment of fat, why don't we use tumescent anesthesia for our ligation and stripping procedure? And I convinced them to do it, and we proceeded to do the procedure under tumescent anesthesia. This, of course, is the remarkable development from Jeff Klein. The next thing that happened is another company named Neuronavigational was developing a radiofrequency device for the treatment of aneurysms in the brain. And they came to Dr. Bergen and I, and they asked us if we could help develop this radio frequency catheter for the treatment of varicose veins. So we started our research, and the company then went bankrupt. Another company called VNUS bought the patents, and then we continued our research on trying to get a radio frequency catheter to close great saphenous veins. I enlisted the help of one of my best friends, Robert Weiss, and the two of us actually started perfecting this treatment. Interestingly, we used a different animal model, a goat, which was, and our animal facility was right next door to a Chinese restaurant. You can't make this stuff up. But the goats did well, the veins went away, and we basically started using it from the animal model into humans. Now, the first cases were performed in Europe. And in Europe, the vascular surgeons did everything under general anesthesia, and they had a lot of problems with cutaneous burns. But because of my expertise in liposculpture, I said, why don't we just do the procedure with tumescent anesthesia? The tumescent anesthesia around the varicose vein would both provide anesthesia, it would constrict the varicose vein, and would it also be a heat sink, so it would prevent any damage to the surrounding tissues. And that led to my very first patient, which was on April 5th, 1999, in my office, proving that we could actually treat a fully awake patient's great saphenous vein, and instead of doing a ligation and stripping procedure. And that probably is the single best thing I've ever done, because it negated any physician from ever having to perform ligation and stripping procedures. And the EVLT, or endoluminal laser closure, of the great saphenous vein is now the most commonly used procedure worldwide for varicose veins. Bob Weiss and I then took that a little further, and with a company called New Star Lasers that we were helping develop a long pulse 1064 nanometer neodymium YAG laser for the treatment of veins, we were able to sort of jerry rig that laser, along with an influx of capital from my father, who actually was on the board of that company, to develop a laser closure, which was much more effective, or basically as effective, but much less expensive than the radio frequency closer. And that became the CTEV, or cool touch endovascular closure of the great saphenous vein. So from what this shows you is so many things can happen when you just put your mind to trying to figure out how to treat something. So not only were we able to open up this field of sclerotherapy, where I've now published countless textbooks and articles on it, many in the 6th edition, in a variety of different languages, to increasing our use of laser and intense pulse light and the development of that, as well as the development of endoluminal laser closures. So in summary, go with your gut. Try to always stretch the boundaries of what you've been taught, and you never know what's going to happen when you start one type of your investigations.
Thank you for listening to the Origins podcast. We encourage you to reach out to the editor of the Dermatology Digest and share your stories.